They say when a spirit house is torn down without asking permission, something else moves in. Not something kind, not something patient, but something that remembers. Welcome to Ghosts of Asia. In this place, we walk the forgotten paths into haunted alleys, drowned temples, and the ruins of rituals buried under modern silence. These stories are not made to comfort you. They are not meant to be told with the lights on. Tonight, we bring you a tale from the quiet suburbs of Chiang Mai, where the air smells of lemongrass and incense, and the walls whisper to those who listen too closely. It begins with a bowl, a whisper, a warning left in ash and petals. This is the Whispering Bowl.
Anya Watnakorn arrived in Chiang Mai just as the rain stopped. The air was still damp from the storm, thick with the scent of wet earth and frangipani. A thin fog clung low to the ground, rolling like breath across the pavement as her cab pulled up to the entrance of the wellness retreat, a pale, angular structure nestled behind a tall concrete wall that looked too new to belong here. The sign outside was minimalist, all lowercase letters in brushed brass. Nava Sanctuary. Beyond it, everything was white. White walls, white stones, white lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. A silence hung over the property, almost sacred, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Anya stepped out, pulling her suitcase behind her. She was tired, not just from the flight, but from the weight of her work. As lead architect for this project, she was here to oversee the final stages of conversion, turning this former residential plot into a modern spiritual haven for the urban elite, a place of healing, tranquility, and tasteful Instagram aesthetics. She designed it herself, the layout, the flow, the feel. But standing at the threshold, something felt off, as if her own blueprint had forgotten something or ignored it. The property manager, Kun Precha, met her at the door with a polite Y and a tight smile. He was in his 60s, wiry and quiet, with the kind of eyes that had seen more than they let on. "Your villa is this way," he said in Thai, motioning past the main lobby. "Edge of the garden, quiet there." Anya nodded, slipping into the local tongue easily. "Perfect. I'll only be here a few weeks." She followed him through the main courtyard, where a single stone fountain gurgled quietly in the center. The water glistened under pale sunlight, disturbed only by the occasional fall of a leaf. Behind it rose the retreat's main meditation hall, all clean lines and soft curves, glass and bamboo. Her design, her vision. But around the edges of the property, something older lingered. She noticed patches of grass that hadn't taken, a half circle of scorched earth behind the garden wall, and a square of concrete that looked like it had been poured hastily over something else. There were no spirit houses on the land, she realized. No samprapum, which was unusual in a Thai property of this size. She didn't ask. Not yet. Her villa was a small, detached unit facing a row of trees. It was modest but beautiful. Pale wooden floors, white linen curtains, a simple kitchenette, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of lemongrass. There were no sharp edges, no clutter, just peace. "You'll be left alone," Precha said, "but call if you need anything." She thanked him. Then he handed her a small ceramic keychain shaped like a lotus and left without another word. For the rest of the day, Anya unpacked, checked emails, and reviewed the updated construction timelines. The site had made rapid progress while she'd been away, but there were inconsistencies in the reports. delays not explained, changes to the layout made without her sign-off. She told herself she'd ask about it tomorrow. That night, she stood on the patio with a cup of tea, looking out at the dark tree line. It was quiet. No cars, no voices. Just the occasional rustle of wind and the soft tinkling of distant wind chimes. It should have been calming. Instead, it felt hollow. Anya went to bed early, lulled to sleep by the sound of cicadas and the trickle of the garden fountain. But at dawn, something woke her. Not a noise, not a dream, but just a strange awareness, like something had shifted in the air. She rose and opened the door. And there it was, sitting neatly on the threshold of her villa, a small weathered stone bowl. Inside it, a mixture of ash and red flower petals. No note, no explanation. She stared at it for a long moment. The bowl was old, darker in color than anything else on the property, and lined with faint cracks. The petals looked freshly plucked, their color vibrant against the gray ash. Some were marigold, some hibiscus. One looked like it had been burned at the edges. She stepped back, looking left and right. No sign of anyone nearby. It must be a staff offering, she reasoned. Maybe a blessing for guests, or maybe a leftover tradition someone quietly maintained. She didn't want to question it too much, not yet. She picked the bowl up carefully and set it on the side table by the patio. The petals were starting to smell sweet, almost too sweet. She showered, dressed, and walked to the main office, where Kun Precha was already reviewing contractor logs. She hesitated, then asked casually, "Do you know who left the offering bowl at my door this morning?" He looked up slowly. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. "There is no such staff ritual," he said flatly. Anya blinked. "No one else stays on that side of the property, right?" "Correct. Maybe it was left there before I arrived?" Precha said nothing. She didn't press, but something cold settled in her stomach as she walked away. That evening, the bowl was still there. She left it alone. The next morning, it was back on her doorstep, this time with fresh petals and a thin layer of fine ash, darker than before. Anya didn't sleep as soundly that night. The wind howled louder through the trees. The bathroom light flickered once and then died. And when she looked in the mirror before bed, she thought she saw something move behind her, just for a second. The bowl returned every morning, always placed precisely at the center of the threshold, never making a sound. By the 5th day, her curiosity was giving way to unease. She took a photo and sent it to a friend in Bangkok, an anthropologist who specialized in northern Thai folklore. His reply came quickly. "That looks like a Tam Kwan offering, but corrupted. Ash is not normally part of it. And needles. Be careful, that's not a blessing." Needles? She hadn't seen any. Not yet. But when she carefully stirred the bowl's contents that evening, she found one, just beneath the layer of petals. A thin, rusted needle. It pricked her finger before she realized what it was. She dropped the bowl. It didn't break. But her hand throbbed all night. That was the first night she dreamed of water. The next morning, she didn't open the door right away. Anya sat on the edge of the bed, hand bandaged, heartbeat low and constant, like the ticking of the small clock by the kitchenette. She'd barely slept. Every sound in the villa had felt amplified. The creak of wood settling, the trickle of water from the bathroom tap, the occasional low moan of the wind slipping beneath the doorframe. But it wasn't fear that kept her still, not entirely.
It was the sensation that something was waiting outside. She finally rose and stepped quietly to the door, heart steady now, oddly resolved. With a slow breath, she unlocked it and pulled it open. And there it was again, the bowl. The petals were fresh, more vivid than yesterday, and laid with care. Deep red hibiscus, darker this time. The ash beneath them had spread, dusting the edge of the stone. But something was different now. A folded scrap of fabric lay across the bowl's rim. It was torn, old, damp with dew. At first glance, it looked like a piece of black ribbon, until she picked it up and realized it was a threaded cord, the kind used to bind wrists in a traditional ritual, a protection charm maybe, or a restraint. A chill slid down her spine. She looked again at the bowl. This was no benign welcome. This wasn't something symbolic. This was a message. She took the bowl and placed it at the far end of her patio near the flower bed. But something about that felt wrong, as if she'd violated a boundary. The bowl didn't belong there. It belonged exactly where it had been set. That night, as she was brushing her teeth, the faucet turned on by itself. A sudden blast of water, cold and loud, gushing from the tap as if a hand had twisted it open in rage. Anya gasped and reached out to shut it off, but as her fingers closed around the knob, she froze. The water was black. Only for a moment, a shimmer of shadow rippling through it, like ink dropped in clear glass. Then it cleared again, running normal, clean, almost as if it had imagined her fear and decided to hide. She stared into the basin. Her reflection shimmered in the shallow water, and behind her, a shape, just barely visible, standing in the doorway. She spun around. Nothing. But the air behind her smelled like wet stone and smoke. She backed out of the bathroom slowly, flicked every light on in the villa, and checked every door, every window, every corner. No one. Nothing. Only silence, except for the occasional sound of water, trickling, gurgling, whispering. She curled up that night on the couch instead of the bed, the bowl left outside untouched, the cord and needle locked in a drawer. And sometime around 3 in the morning, she began to dream again. In the dream, she was submerged in a vast bowl of water. It wasn't a bathtub. It was deeper, rounder, like a basin made of stone, too wide to reach across, carved into the earth like a well. She floated inside it, weightless, her clothes soaked and heavy. The air above shimmered with twilight, and the surface of the water pulsed with ripples that came from no movement. Across from her, just at the edge of the water, stood a woman, hair long and black, soaking wet, plastered to her face. Her skin was pale, almost gray-blue, like someone who had been underwater too long. Her eyes were open but clouded, and her lips were barely parted, as if she had something to say but had long forgotten how. Around her wrists and ankles were black threads, tied tightly, ritualistically. The woman stared directly at Anya, not blinking, and then she opened her mouth, wide, wider than possible, and a rush of water exploded out, drowning the dream in a violent wave of sound. Anya gasped awake on the couch, drenched in sweat. She didn't go back to sleep. At breakfast, she asked Precha about the land, specifically what had been here before the retreat. He didn't answer right away, just stirred his tea slowly, then looked at her with something like apology. Village land, long time ago, then abandoned. Were there wells? Shrines? He hesitated again. Old spirit house, yes. Removed during construction. We performed offering ritual. But was that enough? He didn't answer. She didn't push further, but his silence was heavier than any confirmation. That afternoon she walked the edge of the property, past the outer garden, where a line of uneven grass marked where old tiles had been ripped up. She followed it until she found a corner where the soil was darker, richer, still damp even though it hadn't rained in days. There, at the center of what looked like a forgotten courtyard, was a drain, small, rusted, almost invisible underneath overgrown moss. She crouched beside it and placed her hand on the ground. It was warm, like something beneath the surface had breath. She looked up, and in the villa window across the lawn, she thought she saw something move. Not behind the curtain, in the glass itself. A handprint, pressed from the inside, watery, sliding, vanishing. That night, she didn't wait. She filled a small bowl of water from the kitchen, walked outside, and gently poured it into the old stone offering bowl that had returned, as always, to its place by her door. She didn't know why she did it, only that it felt right. A gesture, a plea, a surrender. The bowl absorbed the water silently, the petals floating gently to the surface. The ash didn't rise, it simply sank, fading into the bottom like smoke dissolving in stillness. When she turned to go back inside, she paused, because just before she closed the door, she thought she heard it. A voice, whispering from the bowl. Not loud, not urgent, just present. A whisper that didn't beg for help. It waited. The next morning, the bowl was still outside her door, but this time something had changed. The water she had left the night before was gone. Not spilled, not evaporated, but gone, as if the bowl had drunk it. The petals were wilted now, their edges curling, their crimson tones faded into a deep brownish red. But it wasn't the color that disturbed her. It was the ash. It had risen again, a thicker layer than before, sticky and dark, clinging to the sides of the bowl as though stirred by unseen hands. And in the center, placed like an offering in reverse, was a small, smooth stone, about the size of a coin, flat, black, cold. Anya picked it up and turned it in her fingers. Someone, or something, had scratched 3 vertical lines into its surface. A mark. A count. A warning? She placed the stone on the side table near her door and stared at the bowl in silence. She should throw it away, smash it, or at least stop feeding it. But something in her gut resisted. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was responsibility, like an unspoken agreement had been made between her and something that didn't speak with words. And now, she was bound. She carried the bowl back to its usual place and gently poured in a fresh cup of water. The petals trembled. At lunch, she called her friend from university, Tita, a historian who had studied Lana culture and local myths. She kept her voice casual, but her fingers drummed nervously on the counter as the phone rang. "Tita, do you know anything about offerings involving ash and flower petals?" she asked when her friend picked up. "Like a can-talk ritual?" "No, this is different. There's also a bowl that keeps returning, same one, every morning, filled with petals, ash, and messages." There was a pause. Then Tita's tone changed. "What kind of messages?" "Today it was a black stone with 3 marks. Yesterday there was a thread, and before that, a sewing needle under the petals. Silence. Tita? That sounds like a variation of Nam Pra Jiao Sua. It's rare and old. Sometimes the bowl was used to honor the spirits of the drowned, especially those who couldn't be cremated properly. Spirits of the drowned? Anya echoed. Yes, women accused of witchcraft, sorcery. If the community believed they were dangerous, they weren't buried. They were tied and submerged in sacred basins until they stopped moving. Then offerings were made daily, water mostly, sometimes petals, never ash. So what does the ash mean? It means, Tita said slowly, someone broke the pact. Later that day, Anya wandered through the wellness grounds with a new sense of unease. She watched how the sunlight fell differently on some parts of the property. The garden near the old drain seemed always shaded, even when no clouds were in the sky. She passed by the main building where guests were starting to arrive. Two women in linen robes meditating under a Bodhi tree, a man sipping herbal tea near the koi pond. None of them looked disturbed. None of them saw the bowl. Only her. She returned to her villa and opened her laptop to review the original blueprints. The land had been purchased 2 years ago, converted from what was listed as a historically unused agricultural zone. No mention of wells, no mention of shrines. But Anya knew what had been erased. She remembered the early sketches. The property had once had a central water basin, round, sunken, framed with stone, marked in the first draft as ornamental, but later removed. She had agreed to the change at the time, thinking it redundant. Now she wasn't so sure. She zoomed in. Right where the basin had been, someone had scribbled in pencil, "Bury the drain, seal the roots, no flow." That handwriting wasn't hers. She shut the laptop, her pulse tightening. That night, she left the water earlier than usual. Not just a small cup, but a full silver bowl she borrowed from the kitchen, filled to the brim and placed gently in the stone vessel outside. She didn't ask why. She just knew it felt right. She whispered, "For you," before closing the door. And for the first time since arriving in the villa, the studio stayed silent all night. No whispers, no dripping taps, no shadows. But the dream came again. This time, the bowl in her dream was enormous, wider than a room, deep enough to fall into and never reach the bottom. Anya stood at the edge, barefoot on cold stone, staring into the black water below. Across from her stood the same woman, still soaked, still silent, still watching. But now, there were others. Figures behind her, female shapes, some young, some old, all silent, all bound. Their faces were blurred as if smeared by water, but Anya could feel them watching her. Not pleading, not begging, judging. The water rippled, and then the first woman spoke. One word, one breath, a sound that echoed like it had been trapped for centuries. Anya couldn't understand it, but she felt it. It meant remember. She woke with a jolt, sweat cooling on her neck, sheets tangled like ropes. She rose slowly, heart hammering, and opened the door. The bowl was there, and for the first time, it was dry. No petals, no ash, no water. Only a single folded note pinned with a new sewing needle. The paper was old, creased, the ink brown with time. The script wasn't Thai. She snapped a photo and sent it to Tita. It took only 5 minutes for the reply. "That's old Lana. It says, 'You are standing where we were buried. Leave water, or leave.'" Anya's hands began to shake. She read the words again and again. The whispering bowl had spoken, not in dreams, not in metaphor, but in command.
Anya stared at the note long after the meaning had sunk in. You are standing where we were buried. Leave water, or leave. The old Lana script swirled across the fragile paper like vines growing in ink. The letters were foreign but familiar, their weight heavier than just language. They were memory, preserved in scratches and blood. She held the note with both hands, as though it might burn her if she dropped it. Outside, the wind had stopped. The birds had stopped. Even the fountain in the courtyard had fallen silent. The whole property felt suspended, not in peace, but in expectation, as if the land itself was holding its breath again. She looked at the bowl, bone dry, the note still pinned with the sewing needle, its sharp end piercing both paper and wood, not symbolic, deliberate, like an anchor. Something wanted her to understand. She picked up the bowl and went inside, gently placing it in the sink. Then she poured a full cup of clean, filtered water and set it carefully inside the bowl, not spilling a drop. This time, she whispered nothing. This time, she listened. But no voice came, no whisper, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of a cicada outside. Still, something had shifted in the room, a pressure, a subtle distortion in the air, as if an unseen presence had stepped closer. She left the bowl by the window and sat at her desk. She opened her laptop, and her screen flickered. Once, then again, then every folder on her desktop blinked out one by one before returning, corrupted. File names scrambled into strings of gibberish. Her blueprint folder renamed itself without her touching a key. The new name read, "Do you remember what you covered?" She slammed the lid shut. Her throat tightened. It wasn't her imagination anymore. It wasn't dreams. It wasn't superstition. It was real. She returned to the main office, pretending to need updates on the site's progress, but in truth, she wanted answers. Something buried, something lost, something sacred that had been violated. "Preacher," she asked quietly, "do you know what this land used to be before it was purchased?" He looked up from his tea slowly. Then, without a word, he stood and walked to the back room. When he returned, he handed her a thin manila folder, yellowed and bent at the corners. "These are the old documents, the ones that didn't get uploaded. Some things are best forgotten, but some things don't let go so easily." She opened the folder. Inside were 4 items: a faded land survey map, hand-drawn with ink and water stains, a black and white photograph of a stone well surrounded by flowers and offerings, the kind left for spirits, a municipal report stamped with the word "discontinued" across a listing for a ritual cleansing basin that had once stood in the center of the plot, and last, a torn piece of paper with a note scribbled in Thai: "Do not seal the drain. Do not disturb the water. They are still thirsty." Her mouth drew dry. "They were drowned here, weren't they?" Preacher didn't answer. "They tied them, sank them, and they never removed the bodies." He looked down. "We don't know how many. The basin was old, very old. The records were already lost when we bought the land." "And the spirit house?" "Destroyed during leveling. The owner thought it would hurt the resale value." Anya's hands trembled.
And the water? He hesitated, then said, "There used to be a well, a stone bowl built around it. Every day someone left water. Every day, even when the house was empty. Until the new architect approved the redesign." Her stomach dropped. That architect was me. She had unknowingly signed off on erasing their sanctuary, and now they were reminding her. That evening, she returned to her villa, bowl in hand, and placed it at the threshold where it had always reappeared. This time, she didn't wait until dark. She filled it slowly, carefully. She lit a candle beside it. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." The wind stirred, soft, not angry, not violent, almost like a sigh. But that night, the dreams came harder. She stood in the center of the drowned basin, this time fully submerged. The water was cold and viscous, thick with silt and shadows. Her limbs moved slowly, like she was caught in a forgotten ritual. And then the woman returned. Her eyes were clearer now, still dead, but focused, intent, as if her soul had remembered its name. Around her the others floated like specters. One had a bell tied to her wrist. One had a broken prayer scroll around her neck. One still had the needle piercing her lip. They drifted closer, not menacing, but not forgiving. The first woman extended her hand, and in her palm was a petal soaked in blood. She pressed it to her chest and whispered again, this time louder, "Remember." Anya woke, choking on her breath, the air heavy with humidity and something else, something metallic, like rust and rainwater. She staggered to the mirror, and in the condensation left on the glass from her breath, a single word had appeared. She didn't understand it. It wasn't Thai. It wasn't English. But her phone translated it through the photo she took. The word was ode. Anya didn't leave the villa that morning. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the condensation slowly fading from the mirror where the word had once lingered. Ode. That was what it had said. Not help us, not forgive us, not even remember us, but ode. As if she or someone in her place had taken something from them, and now payment was overdue. She stood slowly and moved to the sink. The bowl still sat on the windowsill, half filled with water. The petals floated lifelessly, curling like small, bloodied tongues. She touched the water gently. It was cold. Not cool. Cold. The kind of cold that didn't belong in a sunlit room. She drew her hand back. Then, from deep inside the wall behind the sink, she heard it. A gurgle. Soft at first, then louder, like pipes choking on something they couldn't swallow. And beneath that, a whisper. Not in her head, not in her dream, but in the plumbing. She leaned in, trying to make it out. The voice was layered, overlapping itself like several people whispering through the same throat. She couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the emotion behind them. Anger, grief, thirst. It wasn't the kind of thirst that could be quenched by water. It was older, hungrier, buried under centuries of silence. She turned off the tap and stepped away, heart hammering. Then, from the bathroom, a splash. She rushed inside. The faucet was running. Again.
Water was pouring into the sink, too fast, too dark. The sound filled the room with urgency, like the scream of something without a mouth. She lunged for the knob and twisted it shut. The water stopped. Silence returned. But in the sink's shallow pool, something was floating. A single black thread, knotted at both ends, just like the ones tied around the wrists of the drowned woman in her dream. Anya stared at it, unable to move. She didn't pick it up. She didn't have to. The message was clear. They weren't visiting anymore. They were inside now. Later that afternoon, she took a walk around the retreat, hoping to clear her head, or at least pretend her world hadn't just turned inside out. Guests roamed the grounds, unaware. Someone was doing yoga under the trees. A woman laughed softly over tea in the open-air lounge. Everything looked peaceful, but the stillness now felt staged. Anya stopped near the koi pond, where the water shimmered under the sun. She stared at the surface for a moment, letting her eyes soften, and there, for just a flicker of a second, she saw it. A face. Not a reflection. A face, beneath the surface, staring up at her from the depths. Pale, open-eyed, mouth gently moving as if whispering something through the water. She stumbled back, heart pounding. The water rippled, but the fish swam calmly, undisturbed. No one else seemed to notice. She backed away, refusing to look again. That night, she sat outside her villa with the stone bowl in her lap. The sun had gone down. The air was still. Cicadas had gone quiet, and the bowl was warm. She poured water into it slowly, watching it absorb, watching the petals rise and settle. Then she whispered, "I don't know what you want." The bowl said nothing. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Still silence. "But I can't undo what's been done." At that, the water in the bowl trembled, and then from the small drain pipe beside the villa came a low hiss, followed by the distinct sound of water dripping, even though no one had used the bathroom since morning. She walked to the door. She hesitated, then opened it. The mirror inside the bathroom was fogged again. No steam, no running water, just fog. And in the center, a new word had appeared, written as if by a wet fingertip across the glass. Return. Return what? She wiped the mirror clean, but her reflection looked distorted. Her face the same. Her eyes not. They looked older, tired, as if she hadn't slept in days, even though she'd only missed a few hours. The lights flickered. The faucet let out a groan, then spat water in short bursts. She backed out of the room and closed the door. The bowl was still there on the patio, quiet, unassuming. But she knew the truth now. It wasn't a simple ritual. It wasn't a haunting. It was a link. A mouth that never stopped whispering. A throat that led to something deeper, ancient, drowning, and alive. That night, she dreamed again, but this time, she didn't see the woman. She saw herself, tied at the wrists and ankles, lowered into a stone basin by invisible hands. The sky above her was full of smoke, and somewhere nearby, she could hear chanting, not holy, but desperate, as if people were trying to purify something they couldn't understand. She hit the water, and as she sank, she saw them waiting at the bottom. The women, the ones with black threads and bloodied petals. They didn't speak this time. They only opened their mouths wide, and in their mouths, more petals, more ash, and the sound of rushing water like a flood trying to speak. Then Anya felt hands on her ankles, pulling, tugging, not to drown her,
but to drag her down to show her something. She kicked and screamed and woke up gasping, clawing at her bedsheets. The bowl outside was empty again, but this time the message wasn't written in the mirror. It was carved into the window frame. A single word, in jagged, wet scratches. Debt.
Anya stared at the carved word in the window frame, her breath shallow. Debt. The scratches were still wet. Not blood, not paint. Water. Thin trails of moisture bled from the letters, like tears sliding down a face. They soaked into the wooden frame and left behind the faint scent of smoke and something older, like moss or rot, or the inside of a sealed well that hadn't been opened in decades. She reached for it instinctively. Her fingers hovered just above the grooves, and a sudden shiver ran up her spine, stopping her hand mid-air. Not because of fear, but because of recognition. She'd seen that word before, in her dream, whispered beneath the water by mouths too full of petals to speak clearly. And now, it had followed her out. She backed away, heart thudding in her chest. The mirror in the bathroom fogged again. But there was no steam, no heat, no cause. Only condensation, thick and unnatural, blooming across the glass in circular patterns, as if something were breathing against it from the other side. She stepped forward, and this time she didn't wipe it away. She watched, waited, and slowly words began to appear. Not scratched, not carved, but formed from the fog itself, as if a fingertip was tracing letters on the other side of the mirror's skin. Where is the water? Her breath caught. She whispered, "It's in the bowl. I put it there." Another word surfaced in the fog, replacing the last. Late. Then another. Pain. And finally, "You remember now." "No, I don't remember. I wasn't here. I didn't do this." The fog began to pull back, but before it disappeared, one last word smeared itself into the fading moisture. Liar. She didn't sleep that night. She sat outside beside the bowl, legs pulled to her chest, wrapped in a blanket as the wind moved through the trees without rustling a single leaf. The water in the bowl remained still, but it no longer reflected the stars. It reflected nothing, as if the surface was a sealed lid hiding something below. She watched it for hours, waiting, listening, and just before dawn, she heard it again, from the bowl. A soft splash, then the unmistakable sound of something crawling through pipes. Not water, something wet, something with weight. The villa creaked, the walls moaned, the drain in the bathroom gurgled once. Then the whispering returned, louder this time, echoing from inside the mirror. She turned toward it, heart pounding. There was no fog now, just a clear reflection of her own exhausted face. And behind her, for a split second, the outline of another face, eyes wide, lips split open, hair dripping, gone before she could turn around. She closed the bathroom door and shoved a towel under the crack. Then she unplugged the sink, the tub, even the kettle. And finally, she sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the front door, where the bowl still waited, patient as always. That morning, there was something new inside it. No ash, no petals, only a folded piece of mirror glass, jagged at the edges, with fog still clinging to its surface. Someone or something had scratched into it a single word: witness. She brought it inside carefully, cradling it in a towel. When she set it down on the table, the glass trembled in her hands, not because of the wind, because of something beneath it. For the first time, she opened the drawer where she'd hidden the old notes, the threads, the sewing needles. She spread them out beside the glass, a trail of small, inexplicable warnings, messages left not to frighten, but to remind. But of what? Tita called her later that afternoon. I did some digging. The ritual basin that once stood on your land wasn't just a cleansing site. It was a punishment site. Anya froze. What kind of punishment? In the Ayutthaya period, women suspected of dark magic were drowned in sacred water, not to kill them, but to silence them. Their spirits were believed to linger near the last thing that held them, usually water, wells, basins, bowls. And what happens if the water's gone? Tita's voice lowered. They return through mirrors, through dreams, through anything reflective. They whisper until they're given what was taken. And what was taken? A pause. Memory. Their story. That night, Anya placed the mirror shard back into the bowl. She filled it with water until the glass was submerged. Then she whispered, "Show me." The water trembled. The petals returned, curling up from beneath the surface, though she hadn't placed any. And in the ripples, a new vision formed. Not a dream, not a hallucination, but a memory not her own. She saw the ritual basin. She saw the ropes, the women, the accusation. A young woman stood in the center, hands bound, eyes dry. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She only said one word before she was lowered into the water. Remember. And standing at the edge, directing the ritual, was Anya, or someone with her face, wearing ancient robes, expression unreadable. A witness, an architect, a silent accomplice. Anya's breath hitched. The bowl cracked. Water spilled over the edges like blood pouring from a wound. And the whisper came again, not in her ears, but in her bones. You were there. You watched. Now you build on what you buried.
The bowl had cracked. A thin line ran down its side like a healed scar suddenly split open again. Water bled from it slowly, soaking into the wood of the table, curling around the edge like a tide. The petals floated gently in the spill, dark red and limp, their color bleeding into the grain like a slow, whispering stain. Anya sat in silence. She had not moved since the vision, not spoken, not cried, because part of her knew. Somewhere beneath the logic and the denial, she had always known. The whispers weren't just haunting her, they were calling her back, to a place in time where the water was sacred and the judgment was swift, where rituals were not questioned and silence was the price of order. A time when people like her, those who built, who designed, who directed, stood beside the suffering and said nothing. Now the past had returned, and it remembered everything. She touched the cracked bowl with the tip of her finger. It was warm again. Not sun warm, body warm, like skin. She whispered, "What do you want from me?" But the bowl gave no answer, only a faint hum, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath still water. She lifted the broken vessel and stepped outside, walking barefoot across the patio tiles, down the small stone path toward the garden's edge, where the grass had never grown, where the concrete slab had been poured without ceremony. She stood at the center of it, the place where the original basin once stood, and she knelt, slowly, gently. She placed the bowl at the center. The earth beneath her seemed to pulse, once, just once, like a sleeping thing stirring in its dreams. She poured fresh water into the cracked bowl, let it seep through the hairline fracture and disappear into the soil. Then she whispered again, "I see you now." A gust of wind passed over her shoulders, but the trees did not move. Only the petals inside the bowl stirred, drifting in slow, perfect spirals as if being turned by invisible fingers. And then a shape appeared in the water's reflection, not behind her, beneath her. A woman's face, pale, eyes open, mouth full of threads. The image vanished in a blink, but Anya had seen it, and the bowl gave her something in return. Not a word this time, not a dream, but a memory. Not hers, theirs. She was standing in the past again. The sun was harsh, the air full of smoke. A crowd had gathered around the basin. The accused stood at the center. 5 women, bound with black cords, heads bowed. Their crimes were written on scrolls pinned to their robes. Sorcery, corruption, unnatural knowledge. None resisted. They were not allowed to speak. In the crowd, Anya saw herself, or someone with her face, but not watching, recording, designing the edges of the basin, measuring the depth, and marking the placement of the offering stones. She was not a judge, not an executioner, but she had drawn the lines. She had defined the space in which others would be drowned. And when the last woman was submerged, when her body stilled beneath the surface, that version of Anya had walked away, expressionless, detached, professional. The basin had been covered a week later, and for generations the ground remained quiet, until someone, another version of Anya, came back to pave it over once more. She returned to herself with a jolt. Still kneeling in the garden, the cracked bowl sat before her, now empty, dry. But in its base, something new had appeared. A single petal, not red, not black, white. A symbol of mourning in Northern Thai tradition, and a message. The bowl was now hers to carry, not as a curse, but as a penance. She lifted it carefully and brought it back to the villa. This time she did not fill it out of fear. She filled it out of respect, out of remembrance. She placed it beside the mirror and whispered, "I won't cover it again." That night, no dream came, no face, no whisper, only sleep, heavy and dreamless, like someone pressing cool water to a fevered forehead. In the morning, the bowl was full, and floating inside it were 5 petals, one for each of the drowned. Beneath them, a new stone had appeared, flat, smooth, with a symbol carved into it Anya did not recognize. She sent a photo to Taida. The reply came moments later. "That's not Lana script. It's older, pre-Angkorian. It means, 'You remember.'" Anya held the stone in her hand. It was warm, alive, and she knew. The bowl remembered too.
The next morning, Anya woke to sunlight spilling gently across the floor. For the first time since arriving, there was no dread waiting in her chest, no fog on the mirror, no whispers in the pipes, only silence. Not the heavy, charged silence she had come to fear, but a peaceful stillness, like the land itself was sleeping again. She rose slowly, walked to the door, and opened it. The bowl was exactly where she had left it, full, clear, undisturbed. 5 white petals floated at the surface, drifting softly in the morning breeze. She almost smiled, almost. because beneath that calm, a thought pulsed in the back of her mind. What happens if I skip it? It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't disbelief. It was curiosity, that small, dangerous urge to test the rules once you think you understand them. A day without water. Would they forgive that? Would they notice? She knelt before the bowl, fingers brushing the rim, then slowly stood again and walked away. No offering, no water, no whisper. Not this morning. By noon, the light had shifted strangely. What had been soft and warm now felt too bright, the sun casting harsh shadows along the villa's white walls. The plants on her patio looked slightly wilted, though the air was humid. The fountain in the courtyard had stopped, not dry, not broken, just still, as if waiting. She opened her laptop to review design files for the final development phase. But something was wrong. The folders blinked. A low grinding sound came from the hard drive. Then slowly, file names began changing before her eyes. Blueprint Chiang Mai Final became You Promised. Retreat Render 3D became We Watched You Leave. Her fingers froze over the trackpad. Then a black screen. Then a single line of white text appeared in the center. Where is our water? The screen blinked once and shut down. The power wouldn't come back. She slammed the lid and pushed it aside, heart racing. She looked to the window. The bowl was still there, untouched, but now the 5 white petals had turned black. That night, the pipes began to hiss again. Water rattled through them in short, violent bursts, echoing behind the walls like muffled screams. The bathroom mirror fogged over even though no one had entered. And this time, the fog didn't fade. It grew, spread, seeped into the bedroom window, the kitchen glass, the TV screen, any surface that could reflect. And in each one, Anya saw a different face. All of them female. All of them staring. All of them with black threads around their wrists. Some wept. Some opened their mouths but produced no sound. One held out her hand, palm up, as if begging. Another held a small, cracked bowl. Empty. Anya backed into the hallway, breath catching in her throat. From the pipes came a new sound, not whispers, wailing, low and muffled like someone screaming underwater, full of pain and betrayal. The lights flickered violently, casting long shadows across the walls that didn't move when she did. The mirror shattered. Every pane of glass in the villa exploded inward with a single deafening crack. Water sprayed from the sink, the tub, even the toilet, gushing upward in unnatural bursts, drenching the floors. And in the center of the room, in the flickering light, the bowl stood upright, still unbroken, still full, but now the water had turned dark, thick, black, reflecting nothing. And floating in it wasn't petals. It was a thread-bound wrist severed at the elbow, just barely visible beneath the surface. Anya screamed and stumbled back. The water in the bowl churned. Then it spoke. Not with words, not even with sound, but with presence, an overwhelming awareness that filled the room like drowning air, and the meaning was clear. We kept our silence. You broke the pact. We gave you memory. You gave us nothing. You forgot again." She fell to her knees and grabbed the bowl, water sloshing over her hands, soaking her clothes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to skip it. I thought—" The water surged up suddenly, splashing against her face like a slap. And then everything stopped. The water receded. The lights stabilized. The glass fragments lay still, and in the bowl, once again, floated 5 petals. Now white, now soft, now calm. The next morning, Anya didn't hesitate. She filled the bowl before the sun rose, knelt, whispered an apology, and placed a single fresh jasmine blossom in the center, watching it open slowly in the water. The wind sighed across the patio, and somewhere deep in the pipes, the whispering stopped. She had learned her lesson. This was no routine. This was no ritual to skip. This was a contract, a sacred debt paid daily. And the bowl would remember every time it wasn't honored.
That night, the dream returned. Not sudden, not jarring. It began in silence, complete, suffocating silence, as if the world had stopped breathing. Anya stood in the center of a still lake, the water perfectly smooth beneath her bare feet, not floating, not sinking, just standing on the surface, suspended in an impossible moment where time didn't seem to pass. The sky above was dark, colorless, yet full of motion, like clouds rolling behind a wall of glass. Across the water, maybe 20 paces away, she stood. The woman. The same one from the first dream, and the second, and the mirror. Long black hair, soaked and clinging to her skin. Pale eyes, almost white. Wrists bound with black cords. Ankles, too. The knots were soaked, frayed as if worn by centuries of struggle. But this time, she didn't just stare. She moved. Slowly, deliberately. Walking across the water, barefoot like Anya, not making a sound, the hem of her dress trailing ripples that glowed faintly beneath her steps. Anya wanted to speak, to run, to kneel, but she could do none of it. She was rooted. The woman stopped only inches away, close enough for Anya to see the faint bruises on her throat, close enough to see that her lips had been sewn shut, black thread crossing them in a pattern of silence, crude and sacred all at once. Yet still, her voice came, not from her mouth, but from the bowl. A whisper that filled the dream like water rushing in around her ears. "You saw us." The voice was not angry. It was exhausted, weary, heavy with years unspoken. "You watched. You said nothing." "I didn't understand," Anya whispered, not sure if she was speaking aloud or within the dream itself. "But you remember." Anya felt her knees begin to weaken. "I was part of it, wasn't I?" The woman tilted her head slightly. Her lips did not move, but the cords around her wrists tightened as if pulled by invisible hands, and a ripple ran through the lake. "You are not the first, but you are the last." Anya blinked, tears spilling freely. "What do I do?" The woman raised her hand, opened her palm, and inside it, a mirror shard, the same as before, but now it reflected something different. Not Anya's face, but a stone basin surrounded by women in white robes, the same basin the retreat had paved over. And in the center of the image, a young girl knelt beside the water, crying softly. Her face was blurred, but the voice whispered again, "She remembers too." The woman stepped backward now, disappearing inch by inch into the black water, like sinking without resistance. Before she vanished entirely, she spoke one final word: "Return." And the dream shattered like glass. Anya sat upright in bed, gasping. The room was dark, still. The bowl sat on the windowsill, half full, petals bobbing gently. But something else had appeared beside it. A second bowl, smaller, new, empty, its stone untouched. No cracks, no ash, no petals. Only one small white ribbon laid inside, curled like a sleeping serpent. She reached for it, and when her fingers brushed the stone, her mind flashed. A little girl, long black hair, crying in front of a broken offering bowl. Her mother behind her, whispering that the water must never stop, that the voices must never be ignored. That girl, she wasn't just any child. She was Anya. Not in this life, but in another. The one who watched, the one who forgot, the one who left. The voices hadn't chosen her randomly. They had waited, and when the ground was disturbed, when the basin was buried once more, they had returned for the only witness who had once made a promise and broken it. She carried both bowls outside, placed them side by side, one cracked, full, the other new, empty. She poured water into both, lit a candle between them, and whispered, "I remember." The wind stirred the flame, but didn't snuff it. Somewhere in the trees, a bird cried out once, and then went silent. And from the kitchen sink, a single drop of water fell, clear, steady, like a tear returning home. The next morning, the wind didn't blow. The air hung heavy over the retreat, as if the land itself was waiting again, but not with menace, with memory. Anya opened the door and stepped out barefoot, as she had done every morning now. Both bowls were still there. The original one, cracked and ancient, cradling dark water and 5 white petals. And the new one, smooth, whole, untouched, now filled with clear water that shimmered under the rising sun. The white ribbon still lay curled at the bottom, but today a single red petal floated above it. A shift, a signal. The debt was still owed, but it had become something else. Not punishment, not retribution, but inheritance. Anya knelt between the bowls, hands gently resting on her thighs. The concrete beneath her knees was warm, not from sunlight, but from something older, something beneath. She whispered, "I understand now." And the land stirred. The rest of the day passed without incident. The staff avoided eye contact. The guests, as always, smiled politely and walked barefoot through curated silence. But Anya's mind was elsewhere, turning over the memories, the dreams, the whispers, the face in the water. And one question kept returning. Why her? Why not the developers? Why not the contractors? Why not the men who sealed the drain and tore out the spirit house? The answer came not in a dream, but in a memory, her own. A meeting 1 year earlier, blueprints on a table, a choice between two designs. One preserved the ancient well and built the meditation deck around it, honoring the space. The other sealed it off for convenience, replaced it with a minimalist water feature, shallow, controlled, modern. She had chosen the second, not out of cruelty, but out of aesthetic, because it was cleaner, because she didn't want the spiritual complications, because she thought she could design peace without honoring what was already sacred. She was wrong, and the curse that followed wasn't just supernatural, it was architectural. She hadn't just disturbed a resting place, she had redefined it, rewritten the spiritual map of the land. And now she was part of it, not as a victim, but as a keeper. She walked to the main courtyard that afternoon, stood in the center of the guests' meditation platform, and looked down at the polished wooden tiles. Below her, buried deep, lay the original ritual basin. No one else knew it was there, but she felt it, still pulsing, still whispering. She sat cross-legged and closed her eyes, not to meditate, but to listen. And in the stillness, beneath the sounds of cicadas and distant fountains, she heard it again. That familiar whisper, not angry, not warning, just present. You are the witness. You are the architect. You must keep the bowl full. That night she returned to her villa and found something new. A third bowl, even smaller than the others, placed gently at the edge of her pillow. Inside, a petal, but not red, not white, blue. A symbol of devotion in old Lana traditions, a sign of transition when a spirit no longer seeks justice, but remembrance. She held the bowl in both hands. It felt lighter than the others, but colder. She carried it outside and placed it between the other two, forming a triangle. The wind picked up for the first time all day. A soft breeze, cool and wet, smelling faintly of stone and jasmine. She poured water into the third bowl. The blue petal floated gently, spinning once, then resting in stillness. She whispered, "What happens if I leave?" There was no answer, only the water's surface, perfectly still. But deep inside, she felt it, the truth. If she left, the bowls would dry, the whispering would rise, and the curse would begin again, not just for her, but for whoever came next. She was not the chosen, she was the returning, the cycle's anchor, the final one who remembered. And so long as she stayed, the water would stay full, the voices would stay calm, and the basin would stay buried, not in concrete, but in peace. Later that night, as the candles flickered low and the bowls glistened under moonlight, Anya sat beside them with her journal open. She began to write. Not her thoughts, not her fears, but their story. The women, the drowning, the betrayal, the silence, and the bowl. Each entry was a drop, each page a ripple, because architecture was more than buildings. It was memory in structure, and remembrance was the only blueprint that mattered now. Rain came the next morning, soft at first, a whisper across the rooftops, tapping gently on leaves and tile, like fingers rapping against a memory.
Anya stood at the patio doorway, watching the bowls. The rain touched them, but the water inside didn't ripple. It stayed still, as if protected, as if sacred. The petals inside each bowl floated peacefully, white, red, and blue, like offerings in a ceremony she had not been taught, but somehow remembered. Behind her, the villa was quiet, still. No hissing pipes, no fogged mirror, no whispers. But peace, she had learned, was never permanent. It was only borrowed. And something was stirring again, not in the dreams, not in the reflections, but beneath. That afternoon, she returned to the meditation platform. It had stopped raining by then. The air smelled like wet earth and wood smoke. She stood at the center of the deck, staring at the seamless teak tiles polished to perfection, a luxury aesthetic designed to erase what had come before. But it hadn't. She could feel it, like standing above a buried body and feeling it breathe. She knelt down and placed her palm flat against the floor. It pulsed, not with sound, but with presence. And she knew the basin was still there, cracked, empty, thirsty, not for vengeance, for memory. She fetched a pry bar from the storage shed and returned to the deck just before dusk, heart pounding like she was trespassing in her own design. She slid it gently beneath one of the tiles near the center, paused, and pulled. With a low creak, the tile lifted, revealing stone beneath. Dark, pitted, ancient. A single handprint had been etched into the rock, so worn it could barely be seen unless the light hit it just right. She removed another tile, and another, and soon a patch of the original ritual basin revealed itself, not intact but present, choked with dust, sealed in darkness, but waiting. Anya stepped back, breath catching in her throat. It hadn't been destroyed. It had only been covered, hidden, silenced again, just like before. And the bowl, it had always been trying to lead her here, to the source, to the truth, to the place where the first voice had drowned and memory had been drowned with it. She knelt over the exposed basin, whispering, "I'm here." A breeze passed through the platform, cold and sudden, rattling the surrounding bamboo. From somewhere distant, thunder rolled low and long like a warning. And then, from deep within the exposed stone, a faint gurgle echoed upward, as if something far below had shifted in its sleep. The basin had no water left, but it remembered. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced the villa, windows open, candles lit, all 3 bowls carefully refilled and aligned on the patio. At midnight, the rain returned, harder now, angrier. Wind whipped through the retreat, rattling doors, bending trees. The koi pond overflowed, the main path flooded. Guests were escorted inside with staff with umbrellas and quiet urgency. But Anya walked barefoot through the storm, crossing the grounds until she reached the exposed basin. The deck tiles she had removed were scattered. The handprint on the stone was glowing faintly now, not with light, but with memory. She dropped to her knees and pressed her palm to it. The cold shot up her arm like electricity, and she saw it. Not a dream, a vision. She saw the first offering, the first woman. She saw the water rise and the silence spread like smoke. She saw herself again, in another time, another life, watching from the edge, holding a bowl, too afraid to speak, too young, too complicit, too human. The ritual hadn't just drowned bodies, it drowned truth. And now, The land demanded it be spoken. She pulled back, soaked, shivering, and whispered, "I will tell your story." Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning illuminated the retreat in a white flash, and for the briefest moment, in every puddle, every bowl, every piece of broken mirror, she saw them. The 5 women, standing together, not sad, not vengeful, but seen, acknowledged, their bindings no longer visible, only their eyes, watching her, waiting. And then they were gone. She replaced the tiles the next morning, not to hide, but to seal, this time with water beneath them, a fresh offering poured directly into the stone basin before she closed it. And beneath the final plank, she placed a small silver token engraved with 5 circles, one for each woman. Then she whispered one last promise. "No one will cover you again in silence." The tiles clicked into place. The deck returned to stillness. But now, the air above it felt different, lighter. And in her bones, she knew. The land had shifted. The curse had quieted. But the story was just beginning. The rain didn't return the next day. The sky above Chiang Mai turned a muted silver, quiet and watchful. The ground, still damp from the storm, glistened beneath the filtered light. Everything felt washed clean, but not erased, the kind of clean that comes after confession, after reckoning. The whispering had stopped, but the memory remained, and Anya now understood something she hadn't before. The story wasn't just hers to witness, it was hers to carry. She stood at the edge of the meditation platform, where the newly resealed basin now rested quietly beneath the tiles. Her journal in hand, she turned to a page she hadn't dared touch until now. The title in her handwriting, "Where the Witches Were Drowned." It was a phrase no one had spoken aloud on the property. Not the owners, not the contractors, not even Preacher. But it lived beneath every stone, every pipe, every crack in the walls. She read aloud, "They were not witches. They were not dangerous. They were women who knew more than they were allowed, who saw more than they should have, who were bound and silenced by the fear of men and the rituals of power. Their punishment was drowning, their voices stolen by water. But memory cannot drown." Her voice didn't echo. It didn't need to. The words soaked into the earth like water into thirsty soil. Later that afternoon, she met with Preacher. They sat on the steps outside the administrative office, watching the wind move gently through the trees. No guests disturbed them, no staff interrupted. She handed him the journal. "These stories," she said, "they need to be part of the retreat." He looked at her, wary. "You want to tell the guests?" "I want to honor the land, not hide from it, not bury it again." He flipped through the pages, eyes lingering on the sketches, the basin, the threads, the bowl. "If you tell this story," he said slowly, "you'll lose some visitors. I know. You might lose the project. I don't care." He closed the book gently. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally, quietly, he nodded. "I'll help you." They began with the outer garden, the area that had always resisted growth, where the grass died and the soil cracked no matter how much irrigation they tried. Anya sketched a new design, a quiet memorial shaped like a lotus in bloom, where guests could sit and leave bowls of water beneath 5 engraved stones, one for each of the drowned. No names, no dates, Just symbols, a cord, a petal, a mirror, a mouth sewn shut, and a single drop of water. The shrine wasn't meant for worship. It was meant for acknowledgement, a space to remember what was taken, to sit in silence and hear what was once drowned. One evening, as workers carefully laid stones for the shrine's base, a woman approached Anya. Not staff, not a guest, a local. She held a small metal offering bowl in her hands, worn smooth by time and use. "I heard you're making something new," the woman said in Thai. Anya nodded. "Not new, just uncovered." She handed her the bowl. "My grandmother used to bring water to this land every morning. She said the spirits here were deep, but not cruel. She said one day a woman would come who remembered." Anya took the bowl gently, overcome by a quiet ache in her chest. "What was your grandmother's name?" she asked. The woman smiled faintly. "May Sang." Anya's breath caught. That name had appeared in her dreams, etched into one of the scrolls. She bowed her head in reverence, holding the offering bowl close. That night, she placed it in the center of the new shrine, filled it with fresh water, and added a single blue petal. The wind passed softly through the stones, and in the silence, she felt them again, the five, standing at the edge of memory, not bound, not weeping, just watching, and at last, at peace. Weeks passed. The shrine was completed. The story, once hidden beneath concrete and silence, became part of the retreat's welcome ritual. Every new guest was invited, not required, to fill a bowl and offer water to the memory of those who had been forgotten. Some did, some didn't, but the water never ran dry again. And the whispering, it became something else, not a warning, not a curse, but a hum, low, constant, peaceful, a sound like a voice remembering its own name. One morning, Anya walked the path between the bowls as sunlight broke through the mist. The air smelled of flowers and rain-soaked earth. She paused beside the original stone bowl, the one that had started it all. It sat on its pedestal now, no longer returning to her doorstep each morning. She no longer needed to fill it daily, but she still did. As she poured the water, a petal fell from the sky, red, soft, carried by wind. It landed gently in the bowl, and beneath the surface, just for a heartbeat, a face appeared, not drowned, not angry, smiling, then gone. And the bowl whispered,
"Thank you." It happened without warning. A sound, sudden, sharp, unmistakable, rang out across the retreat just after sunrise, like stones splitting under pressure, like something ancient exhaling its last breath. Anya was on the far side of the garden when she heard it. She froze, the watering can still in her hand, eyes lifted toward the shrine. Something was wrong. She walked slowly, each step heavier than the last, dread thickening in her chest like smoke. When she reached the offering pedestal, she saw it. The bowl, the original one, the cracked, weathered vessel that had appeared on her doorstep each morning, had split clean in half. Not from a fall, not from force. It had simply given out, collapsed, as if its purpose had ended. Water pooled at the base of the pedestal, soaking into the soil, darkening it to the color of ash. The 5 petals inside, red, white, blue, and 2 faded black ones, drifted apart like paper boats in the final tide. Anya sank to her knees beside it, touched the broken pieces. They were warm, then cool, then still, like a body after death. She wanted to cry, but no tears came, just a deep, hollow ache, the kind that lives not in the heart, but in the bones. She whispered, "I'm still here." And for the first time in weeks, there was no answer, no ripple, no hum, no whisper, only silence, total, complete, and terrifying. By noon, word had spread. Staff avoided the shrine. Guests asked questions with uneasy smiles. Someone suggested replacing the bowl with a replica. Anya refused. She said, it wasn't decoration, it was a witness. That evening, she sat at the edge of the shrine with the broken pieces laid before her, gently wrapped in cloth. She tried to listen, but the air remained silent. She lit a candle anyway, poured water into the second bowl, the one given to her in the dream, and she waited. Hours passed, the flame flickered, the water stayed still, and the whispering never came. It was like a voice had finally finished its sentence and disappeared. That night she dreamed again, but not of water, not of bindings, not of the five. This dream was different. She stood in a field of dry earth beneath a sky that felt close and low. Before her stood a young girl, the same girl she had seen in the mirror fragments, the same blurred figure from the old memory. Only now her face was clear, soft, human. Anya knelt in front of her. "I'm sorry. I waited too long." The girl shook her head gently. "You came back. That was enough." She held out her hand. In her palm was a new bowl, uncracked, empty, but glowing faintly from within, as if the stone itself remembered light. She asked, "May I touch it?" And the girl smiled. "It's yours." Anya reached out slowly, fingers brushing the edge, and the moment she touched it, she woke up. Morning light filled the villa, cool, pale, still. On her bedside table, where no one had placed anything, rested a small stone bowl, new, unmarked, but familiar. She picked it up and held it close. Inside, a single drop of water. Just one. No more, no less. But somehow, that drop held everything. The sorrow, the rage, the memory, the forgiveness. And she understood. The first bowl had broken, not out of punishment, but release. It had carried its burden. It had told its story. And now, a new vessel had been given, not to carry the curse, but to carry the truth. She placed the bowl at the center of the shrine that afternoon, surrounded by the stones etched with the 5 sacred symbols. Visitors came. Some bowed, some stayed silent. One knelt and wept. The shrine didn't demand offerings, but bowls began to appear anyway. From guests, from locals, from strangers. Some left petals, some left water, some left nothing at all. And still the silence held, not empty, but whole. Like a song that had finally ended on the right note. Like a spirit that no longer needed to speak, because someone was still listening.
The retreat became known for its stillness. Not the kind sold in brochures, not curated silence, not performative peace, but something deeper, more ancient, a silence earned. People came and didn't always understand why it felt different here. why their breath slowed, why they cried for no reason at the edge of the garden, why the water in the shrine's bowl seemed cooler than the air, heavier, sacred. They didn't need to know the whole story, only that something had happened here. Something was remembered here. Anya never left. She stayed on as caretaker, not just of buildings, but of memory. The shrine remained untouched. The meditation deck, never rebuilt over the exposed basin, was redesigned to encircle it, a quiet, open space surrounded by wild jasmine and flame trees. No decorations, no incense, just 5 stone seats and 5 water bowls. Each morning, Anya filled the smallest one herself, the bowl from her dream, with cool water and a single flower petal. Some mornings it was white, other days red, occasionally blue. She never chose. She simply woke, and whichever petal had fallen onto the windowsill overnight, that was the one she used. She never questioned it. That's the thing about sacred things. When you finally understand them, you stop needing answers. You just keep the bowl full. One afternoon, long after the rains had ended and the last guest had left for the season, she found a letter waiting at the shrine, folded neatly, placed beneath the largest water bowl. Inside, a child's drawing, 5 figures, all women, smiling. Above them, a sun. Below them, a bowl filled with blue and red and white dots. And in the corner, drawn in crooked Thai script, "My mother said they live here now. I left water. I hope they're not thirsty." Anya smiled. Her hands shook as she folded the paper and placed it inside her journal. That night, she lit 5 candles, one for each voice, each memory, each life that had been called a curse, a witch, a danger, when all they had been was unheard. Now their names were not carved in stone, but their presence echoed in water, in ritual, in quiet bowls placed gently beneath trees. They didn't ask to be remembered with monuments. They only ever asked to be seen, to be given water, to be left in peace. The following month, a man from the city visited. A developer, new money, perfect shoes, clean hands. He asked to meet Anya by the garden shrine. He smiled as he gestured at the open space. "Do you know what this land could earn with a luxury suite here? Imagine infinity tubs, glass walls, the silence, the privacy." Anya looked at him, not with anger, with sorrow. She pointed to the sign by the path, the one carved in 3 languages, Thai, English, and Lana script. He read it aloud. "This is sacred ground. If you take from it, leave water. If you do not understand it, leave in silence. If you plan to build over it, leave." He chuckled, half nervous. "That's, poetic." Anya said nothing, just turned and walked away. He didn't follow. He never returned. In the years that followed, the whispering never came back. But every now and then, in the middle of a dry season or after a lightning strike near the property, a single sound would echo faintly from the pipes, a drop of water falling into a bowl, a reminder, not of fear, but of balance, because the bowl no longer begged to be filled. It simply waited. And those who understood always did. They left water, and they stayed. Or they didn't, and they left. Either way, the bowl remained. Not cursed, not haunted, just listening, just remembering.